Well, hey, Cascade Church, welcome to another Wednesday's Word. My name's Tim. I'm the pastor at Cascade Christian Reformed Church, and it's a pleasure to read the Bible with you. A bunch of us here are using the Daily Audio Bible. These videos are just a few of the things that jumped out for me from the reading. As always, feel free to ask me any questions. The biggest ones lately are about end time issues. Daniel, First John, they get really apocalyptic sounding. First John was talking about the Antichrist. Daniel's talking about the abomination that causes desolation, a phrase Jesus uses in Matthew 24 when he's talking about judgment. So lots going on. The big thing to remember, all the details can get really confusing. The big thing to remember is that Jesus wins. If nothing else makes sense, remember that. Daniel gets specific on a lot of things. You see kings being called out. You see empires rising and falling. If you really get into the weeds of Daniel, you can sit down with the history books between the fall of Jerusalem and the first century, and you've got a lot going on. Alexander the Great, his kingdom is divided into four parts. Part of those become the Roman Empire. The Seleucid Empire gets going. You've got Cleopatra down there with Mark Antony. And a lot of those things are specifically called out in Daniel. It's fascinating. Behind the scenes, there's spiritual war going on. So in Daniel 10, it's one of these beautiful pictures of what we don't see with our eyes normally, is Gabriel comes to Daniel just out of breath saying, hey, you were praying for a while. Daniel had heard from Jeremiah's prophecy that the exile was coming. In Daniel 9, he actually says, I heard from the prophet Jeremiah. I love how the Bible ties together that way. And he's heartbroken because there's going to be a 7-year exile. So he's praying and confessing sin. And something to note in Daniel's prayer of confession is he's confessing personally the sins of the nation. Daniel was not an idolater. Daniel was not corrupt, but he's confessing the corruption and idolatry of the nation. He's not shaking his fist at it saying, those people have ruined Israel. He's just saying, Lord, change me. Start with me. Bring revival to your people. It's a good insight on how we should be praying for America right now. Things are really crazy. And it's really easy to point your finger at those crazy Democrats or those crazy Republicans or whoever you're mad at. Maybe we pause and we pray and ask for God to forgive us. Daniel's praying, and Gabriel shows up and he says, I was trying to get here, but I was delayed by the Prince of Persia. And so that's not the Jake Gyllenhaal movie based on a video game. That was a demonic power that ruled Persia. And Gabriel and this prince were struggling. And then Michael, the archangel, shows up, helps Gabriel out. Gabriel gets out and begins to tell Daniel a series of 70 weeks. And I'll lay this out in the email because it's hard to say off the top of my head, but those weeks point to the death of Jesus. And so he's going to say it's 7 weeks. If you take each week as a year, you see that there's going to be 70 years until the exile's over. And you've got however many, 640 until Jesus is born. It's all in the email. I've linked to some articles also in that. But he begins to talk about the anointed one who would come at the end of those weeks. And he'll be anointed by God, but it'll look like his ministry came to nothing. It'll be cut short. That's the crucifixion of Jesus. And then you have this fantastic rising from the dead. And so Daniel is amazingly precise. And that gives me hope because political situations can feel scary. Right now in the American press, we have Russia threatening Ukraine. We're boycotting the Olympics in China. China has container ships that can hide nuclear war weapons. It's just crazy out there, but God's in control behind all of it. He knows exactly what's going to happen. None of it's catching him by surprise. And so keep your hope. In the Psalms, we've been reading these things called the Psalms of Ascent. And what they meant by ascent is these were given for pilgrimage. A couple times a year, back in the Old Testament, they would make a pilgrimage to Israel. And as they walked up, because Israel was on top of a hill or of a mountain, Mount Sinai, they would sing these songs of ascent. And the songs were written about the journey, written about how amazing God is and how good it is to worship him. And Eugene Peterson has a book on this called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And to him, that's what a pilgrimage life looks like, is we're obedient in a long direction. You're not going to get in shape overnight. We all know that. You're going to take years or weeks to get in shape. You know, you're not going to have to be committed. You can't skip one dessert and suddenly you've lost 20 pounds. You have to skip a lot of desserts and hit the treadmill. And long obediences are what pay off. And what the Psalms are calling us to is this long obedience of life, saying, Lord, I want to live my life for you in a Godward direction. There's going to be times we mess up. There's going to be times when we fail. but the overarching goal of my life is to follow God. And so we keep pushing forward. We keep walking up that hill toward Jerusalem, toward God. And we're saved by grace, but we're also called to live life like it matters. In 1 John, he's saying, if you want to know if you love God, see if you love his people. If you want to know if you believe in God, do you love the people God sent around you? This is how we know what love is, that God loved us first. Before we did anything good or bad, God loved us. And if we've been loved like that, then we need to love like that. If we can love when we don't deserve it, be loved if we don't deserve it, then we can love those who sometimes don't deserve it. So we keep pushing forward into love. And that long obedience of love can be hard. That ties back into Hosea. Hosea is a prophecy, and it's written by a man named Hosea. And what God tells him in chapter 1 is, go ahead and marry a prostitute. So he marries a woman named Gomer. I always thought that was funny, the name, because Gomer Pyle was a thing in my childhood. Probably some of you can remember him. And he's not marrying Gomer Pyle, it's a prostitute named Gomer. And while they're happy for a minute, Gomer goes back to her ways and she's cheating on him. And it's interesting reading this and talking to people in my community. It can sound very sexist, very anti-woman, misogynistic, and that's not the goal. The goal isn't to say that men are faithful to God and women aren't. The goal is to say that God is like Hosea and I'm like Gomer. Not that women are like Gomer, but I am. That I can easily look to money, look to success, look to popularity, look to health, look to the other thing but God. Sometimes even paying those things to satisfy my soul instead of being satisfied in God. That's the message of Hosea. It's not that women are bad, it's that we are all idolaters. John Calvin said that the heart is an idol factory, we'll keep creating them. So be on guard. Always come back to your first love. And speaking of coming back to your first love, get ready, because tomorrow we start the book of Revelation. And let me just correct one thing that will help you understand the book. The title of the book is Revelation, singular. I used to call it Revelations. I know a lot of people who call it the book of Revelations. And it's not a lot of different revelations. The book is revealing one thing, and the one thing it reveals is Jesus. It's a revelation of Jesus. The word apocalypse means a foretelling, so we're looking forward to when Jesus will come back. And the way I read the book, and even though I love the Left Behind books, I don't think this is how history is going to happen, the way that it happens. There's not going to be a Nikolai Carpathia and a rapture. I don't believe that stuff. What I do believe is that Jesus will come back one time dramatically and solve all of our problems. So he'll create a new heavens, a new earth. He's going to judge the wicked. He's going to bring the righteous in his name to a new heaven, a new earth, new resurrection bodies. It happens one time. And what you see in the book is there's about 7 recapitulations, retellings of the whole narrative story in different ways. And you see it getting told again and again. So after you get the letters to the churches, then you've got the throne room, then they start talking about a Christmas story. You're going to see a woman who's giving birth, and her head is in the sky and in the stars. Her feet are on the moon, and a serpent comes to destroy her child. But this child is taken away and given wings and is hidden into the desert. And that's a retelling of Jesus being born. And Satan, in the guise of Herod, was trying to destroy him, but they ran away. The Magi warned them. They went to Egypt, into the desert, and they survived. And so you have a retelling of the cosmic war between God and Satan and how God always wins. And that's the way I read it. There's people who are smarter than me who disagree with me on this, but we can get into some of those details in the coming weeks. But just as you begin to get into the book, don't let it scare you. It's not there to freak you out or to just entertain you. I had a friend who wasn't a Christian who used to tell me that he used to like to take LSD and either watch Fantasia or read Revelation. I don't recommend that. What you want to do instead is read the book and say, okay, Lord, show me how Jesus wins. Not show me who the Antichrist is. I remember when everyone thought Gorbachev was because his birthmark was the sign of the beast. I know people who thought Trump was the Antichrist. You might like Trump. I don't think he was powerful enough to be an Antichrist. People think Biden or Putin. Don't worry so much about that. Worry about instead, how is this revealing Jesus to me? In the middle of all these world conflicts, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of craziness of whatever's happening in the year 2020, or whatever year it's going to be, 2022 coming up, who's Jesus? How does this book reveal him to me? Because he's who we can have hope in. He's the one who is our first love. All right, that's all I got today. As you have questions about Revelation, let me know. I can spend lots of time talking and writing about that, so let me know exactly what you're thinking about so I can be pretty precise in the next coming weeks. Have a great one.